Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. Today we're talking about how to catch giant bass. How to go out and catch your new personal best right now in the middle of winter. With Christmas in the rearview mirror, we're in the heart of winter now. And winter brings a unique opportunity. This is a time of year where you tend to catch less fish, but you have a shot at those truly remarkable fish, those fish of a lifetime, catching your personal best, catching a true giant bass. You can do it right now, all the way through spring, but right in the heart of winter, there's this magic window of opportunity where if you go out and you throw the right style of baits, you've got a really good shot of only getting those truly giant bites. There are all sorts of baits that will catch a fish right now, and we cover those regularly, right? Different finesse techniques, different power techniques, ways to go out in December, in January, and catch fish. But today we're talking about those outliers, the monster bass. And for them, I've got 3 techniques for you. And I'm gonna talk about those 3 styles of fishing. I also want to talk about where to do it on your lake. And that will vary depending on where you are in the country, the style of lake you're on, and what the fish in your lake are eating. That will drastically impact where the biggest fish in the lake will position. So let's start with the 3 styles of baits. Okay, we're gonna cover that right now. Then I'll circle back around and I'll give you a description of the areas in every different style of lake where I would go and put these techniques to work. Now, like I said, there are tons of great ways to catch these fish, or to catch fish, but to set the odds in your favor, to specifically target a monster bass right now in the heart of winter, for me, that really narrows down to 3 techniques. Not that there aren't more that will do it, but these are the ones that are targeting those fish. They respond to them really well. The first one is a big swim bait. Not just a swim bait, a big swim bait. Second one is speed cranking. And the third one is an A-rig. Those are the 3 techniques that I know will consistently get a monster bite no matter where I go. One relies on the predatory instinct of a giant bass. Really, 2 do. The A-rig does the same thing. They're drawing at different aspects of a bass's predatory nature, but they're both doing that. And then speed cranking, that's all about drawing a core response, a feed response out of a bass, whether or not they want to eat. So different approaches, but 3 unique styles of fishing that will all get the same result. All 3 of them can get you a true monster right now. Let's start with swim baits, and then we'll work backward through the other 2. So throw in the big bait, throw in swim baits. This time of year, the vast majority of my fishing is with a wedge style tail, as opposed to a boot style tail. This is one of the few exceptions. This guy, the little creeper, the 8-inch trash fish, is one of those baits that even though it's a boot tail, it's so unbelievably soft that it will still move and it will still have action even in really cold water. See, middle of winter, freezing cold water. The vast majority of baits that are on the market cease to work properly if you're going the right speed. Speed is everything right now. When it comes to swim baits, it's about going as slow as possible. When we get to speed cranking, it's the reverse, and I'll explain that. But for swim baits, it's about going as slow as you can stand. Let me throw that out there, let it get down. When I'm talking about swim bait in this time of year, I mean, we're talking, let me see what gear ratio this one is. 5.8 to 1, okay? Here we go. When I'm swim baiting, we are not talking about going fast. When I tell people to go slow, I mean slow. And we've talked about this in many videos. It's rare that I actually demonstrate what I'm talking about though. When I'm talking slow, I mean slow. If you are going slow, go slower. Cut it in half. Once you've done that, you think you're going as slow as you possibly can, cut it in half again. I am not joking. This is my literal winter swim bait speed. Obviously, we are not covering a lot of water. And that's why knowing where these fish live is critical, because I can go out and do this all day and I may only cover a couple of 100 yards of water. It's not like I'm going down the bank, chucking and winding, and I'm gonna bump into an aggressive fish. It's not gonna happen, not at this speed. As slow as you can go. So the concept, we haven't even made a full turn here yet. I hope you realize that. The concept here is that swim bait is down there sitting on bottom, right? And it is just barely moving. These wedge style tails, they have a lot of mass. Every little piece of gravel and grit that you come up to and you bump, there's a little ripple effect that goes through the body and that tail just wags. When the water is ultra cold, super cold, when the water's in the 30s, when the water's high 30s and the water's in the 40s, that's when this really shines. Now it will shine in the 50s and the 60s too, but that's that magical, super cold water. Giant bass are lethargic. They are sitting on the bottom and they are looking for easy meals. They want a giant meal. They only want to move one time, eat their meal and be done with it. Particularly on lakes that have trout and kokanee. Those bass will just wait. They are an ambush feeder. They will sit and wait and wait and wait until a trout or a kokanee stumbles in front of them, and they will hit that thing just as hard as they can hit it, kill that thing, gulp it down, and go back to doing nothing. They are not willing to follow like they are when the water is warmer. When the water's warmer, you know, we throw a lot of big glide baits to raise fish to see where they are. When that water gets really, really cold, those fish don't want to rise. So just barely crawling is the deal. And those fish, you'll be creeping along like that. Once in a while, it'll be a freight train, but not usually. You'll be going that slow and you'll just feel a tick. That bait's going so slow that the fish will come down and study it. And they'll watch that bait. And when they decide to eat it, they don't come in and crush it. They're not coming from 10 feet away. They've been sitting here looking at it as it's inching along, and they just gulp. The whole thing will be vacuumed up. It won't even touch their mouth. It'll vacuum it up, and then you feel tick when their lips close on the line like a jig bite. Just dunk. It's already completely gulped. You want to hit them with everything you have got and grind those fish back to the boat. This is the time of year to throw a giant swim bait. And I do mean giant. 8-inch baits at a minimum. Now, there will be guys who are like, my fish eat smaller baits. I prefer to throw a 6-inch. That's fine. Go for it. The reason why I say 8-inch at a minimum is drawing power. A fish in cold water is willing to come farther for a larger meal. The larger the meal, the farther they're willing to come to get the meal. So if you throw a 6-inch bait, you have to be that much closer to the fish for them to be willing to creep over and gulp it. So an 8-inch bait seems to be that magical line where they're willing to come far enough that I can get a lot of them. And this is a technique, you may go out and do this for 2 or 3 days and get one bite. You might be on a lake that's special and it's primed up and you're out there and you're like, I don't know if this will work. And you might be the guy who goes out and gets 22 bites in the first day. It will amaze you on some fisheries. This isn't just catching a giant, it just flat catches them. Those fish want a big, easy meal. They don't want to work for it, and they will mow that thing down. Now, again, 8-inch and bigger. So this is the Huddleston, the 8-inch Huddleston. ROF 12 with the jig hook is my preferred. The ROF5 is fine too. The ROF16 is fine because you're getting these baits down glued to the bottom. You're going super slow. If you throw a 5, that's how fast they fall. So ROF5, 5 feet every 10 seconds. You'll have to go crazy slow to keep it on bottom, but that's fine because you're going that slow anyway. A 12 is my preferred because it gets down, it stays down, and it's not so nosed into the rocks, every rock. The 16 has more lead in the nose, so it will hang up harder as it's coming through the rocks than a 12 will, or a 5. So perfect scenario, I like a 12 with a jig hook, but the others will work. The 8-inch and the 10-inch. Savage gear, same deal. I throw the fast sink for this technique, okay? Throw the fast sink in either the 8 or the 10. And then in the trash fish, I throw the bigger size of the trash fish. Now the trash fish, again, it's all about being able to go so slow and still have movement. That's why my list of baits is so short. That's why I'm not telling you there's 15 swim baits I would do this with. You either want a good wedge tail bait that will stay upright and still work right and have that little tiny tail movement when it's bumping into things, or you want a bait like this that's so soft, so supple, it has such big fins that are so paper thin. Same thing. This tail is so soft that it's essentially just laying there behind the bait as you're just slow dragging on the bottom. But when it bumps, that ripple, I mean, you can see it right there when I hit it. That ripple goes through that bait and those fins all start floating and moving. And that's all it takes. Those fish will just be studying that bait. And when it gets that little bit of movement, they punch it. So the swim bait, if you've wondered, hey, when do I grab a Huddleston and go out? Hey, when do I throw a big swim bait? How do I catch one of those giant fish I see other people catching? Now, go out there, fish on likely structures, and we'll get to that here in a minute. I'll finish up with baits first, but fish likely locations, fish them crazy slow. That was not an exaggeration whatsoever. This is a 7-to-1. This is the high gear. This is what I prefer to throw a lot of my swim baits on, especially glide baits. With this, I have to be even more aware to intentionally go so slow that the handle is almost not moving. The only exception to this is if I'm fishing, well, actually there's 2 exceptions. There is a time where you can go faster, and I'm gonna give that to you. First exception is if you're fishing bluff walls, really steep. What I'll do is I'll creep until you kind of feel the bait break loose to the bottom. And as soon as that happens, I free spool. So that bait will come down the rocks. You know, bluff walls have stair steps on them. Drag it out. When it falls off, free spool. Let it fall. Drag it out. When it breaks off, free spool. And you walk it down those bluffs. Those fish will pluck that thing off, usually while it's falling. The one exception is if you get a warm winter day. You know those days like today, where I'm out here in a hoodie. All of a sudden it's warmer than it should be, and it's pretty comfortable. There's this rare exception where those fish will move up shallow because they want to get up into that heat, right? That really, really shallow water will warm up quickly, and they can actually get up in there a few degrees warmer and they can warm their body up. So they'll go right up shallow, and you can go to chucking and winding. On a warm winter afternoon, that can be incredible, and those fish will hit hard because they're coming fast for the bait because they're up in that warm water, and they're only going to be there for a little while. As soon as it gets into the evening, that sun starts to drop, that shallow water, it's not insulated, it will immediately cool back down and those fish will vacate. It's a very short opportunity, but generally speaking, day in and day out, we're talking crawling on the bottom. The other 2 techniques, speed cranking. I mean, we've talked about this so much, I don't have to. Actually, let's do A-rig first, because speed cranking is so different. The A-rig is a little bit different animal. This is more of a reaction strike. I will still fish an A-rig slow in the winter, but I keep it above the bottom. I don't want to be on bottom. What an A-rig does is it triggers something inside of these fish where they react to an entire passing school of food, right? That's what that is. It's all food. And as the entire school is going by, I don't know exactly what it is that triggers those fish. What I think it is, I think personally that an A-rig works better in lakes where fish are pressured than in lakes where they're not. And I think it's because fish have learned over time to stay away from single lures. Single lures might have hooks in them, but schools of fish, until the A-rig came out, schools of fish never had hooks in them, right? I mean, fish adapt to their surroundings. I think some of them had adapted away from eating single profiles. And that's why when the A-rig first hit, so many giant fish all over the country started getting caught. Because those fish had adapted. Again, this is my opinion, but I think those fish had adapted and were completely comfortable running down schools of fish knowing that they were good to go. And all of a sudden they weren't good to go and they started getting caught. But the A-rig, for whatever reason, will trigger a feed response even in cold water. The colder the water, the slower I want to go with my rig. And that's very important. If the water's got a little bit of stain to it, I'm throwing bladed. If the water's really clear, I'm throwing non-bladed. But I'm going as slow as I can without being on bottom. I throw it out, I let it hit bottom. I pray in that 2 seconds it does not get snagged. I pop it up off the bottom and I start, and I just try to parallel bottom. So if I'm coming down a steep bank, I go slow enough that it can be almost penduluming down. If I'm fishing flat, I'm fishing a little faster to keep it right up off the bottom. The baits themselves are key. These are Kitex. That's one of the main baits that I throw. The 13 fishing churro is the one that I throw when the water gets super, super cold, because I go even slower and that bait will continue to have this nice methodical kick even in that really cold water. The important thing is that the bait looks right in the cold water. So when I can fish it faster, I'll usually fish a skinny dipper or something like that, or a spanky. This one here is a spanky paired to Kitex. If that water gets crazy cold, I'll usually go to little Kitex and then to churros to keep that bait swimming right in the really cold water. But again, that A-rig, if you've got trout, kokanee, golden shiners, gizzard, shad, fish will plow a swim bait, but they will also eat an A-rig. But if you're in a fishery where there tends to just be little minnows, they tend to eat bluegills or other small profiles, sometimes that A-rig will completely outshine that swim bait. And I think that's really hard for a lot of anglers to grasp. Getting into swim bait fishing is tough. It's scary. It's hard to know when to throw it. Once you're in swim bait fishing, it's hard to know when to set it down. There is a time to set it down and turn to something else to have a better shot at catching those giant fish. And that's hard for a lot of swim bait anglers to grasp, knowing when to switch between them. The third, again, is speed cranking. And speed cranking, much like A-rigging, is about drawing a feed response in the bass. The same fish that I have to creep a Huddleston for as slow as I could stand, I can burn a crankbait, a proper crankbait, down on top of that fish, pause it, charge it, pause it in front of them, and take off again. It's not because they want to eat it. That's the difference. If this cruises by going fast, they have to want to eat it because it's steady retrieve. They have to want to eat it, pursue it, and eat it. When it's going insanely slow right in front of them, there's a lot of time for that want to eat, that desire to come out, right? They can look, and yes, I'll do that. But if you're going by quickly, it's different. It's just cruising by. But a speed crank, where it's so hard charging, and it's got a sound to it, right? So there's ruckus coming, there's vibration coming, and then this thing just stops and then goes again. It's like a cat and mouse thing. When you're doing that burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause, when that fish has that thing stop and start in front of it, something goes off inside of them. I don't know what it is, but I know exactly what happens as a result. That fish loses its mind and it will go full throttle in pursuit of that crankbait. Full throttle. I don't care how cold the water is. 36, 37, 38 degrees, those fish will come all the way to the boat and eat it on your rod tip, because it's not about wanting to eat it, it's about reacting, and when they react, they go. It's not a choice, it's a core response. That's what makes that bait so powerful. And again, this is the Tactical DD. That's the crankbait that we designed specifically for this. You guys who have watched us talk about this also know that for this specific thing, we also use the Megabass, the Deep X 300 and the Deep 6. There are a couple of really good options for this technique, but it truly is an incredible technique. And just like when the rig really got going, fish aren't ready for it. It draws this feed response that they cannot resist. They have to go. And as a result, you can catch fish that are giant, that are conditioned, and that would choose not to eat a bait if they had a choice. It's not about a choice. It's about a reaction. So all of a sudden, you'll have a fish that won't eat a swim bait. It's seen 100 of these. It doesn't want it. It doesn't want an A-rig. It bit one of those once. That crank comes through. It can't do anything about it, and it will just unload. It's really a remarkable way to catch them. So those are the three techniques, the three styles of lure that I will use all the way through the dead coldest months when I'm trying to catch a giant. There are a lot of other baits that I throw, and some of them you'll catch a giant, right? In amongst other fish. You'll be catching little ones, and all of a sudden you've got a monster. But if I want to target them, if I want to try and catch them, it really is that narrow. Swim bait, A-rig, speed crank. Offhand, I don't think I'm missing anything else. Granted, somebody in the comments will make sure I know I missed something else, and that's okay. But right now, I can't think of anything else. Those are what I use to do that. Now let's talk about where these fish position, okay? Trout guys first, because it's easy. If you've got trout and kokanee in your lake, it doesn't get easier. If they stalk them, the biggest fish in the entire lake live on the point closest, the largest point closest to the boat ramp where they stalk them. The end. If it's outside of stalking season, if there's marinas on your lake, they went to the nearest marina. If there's not marinas, they're probably still on that point. It really is not complicated. Now, catching them takes time because you're waiting for them to want to eat it. So you've got to put your days in. You've got to be there on a day where they're up feeding, right? Even if you know the right place and the giant fish are there and you're throwing the right bait, if she ate a real trout yesterday, she's probably not going to bite today, right? They also have to be hungry. It seems to me over the years that if there's a trout stalking on a lake and I missed my opportunity, it's about 3 days before those giant fish really started making moves again. That's about how long they all got their trout and they all went and they're digesting. They're done. It's about 3 days before they start being willing to go again. In my experience, your experience might be different. That's always been my window. So if I miss my opportunity, that's how long I usually wait. That's gonna save somebody a lot of time. Now, if they don't stalk trout, if they're in there naturally, trout, kokanee, those fish, typically where those fish are going to position to eat them is on outside points. Long tapering points in particular, and humps. Places that the trout or the kokanee have to go over the top of, okay? Not necessarily, you know, if you've got a steep point and they have to go around it, if that's the only kind of points your lake has, they'll be there. But if they have a choice between a steep point and a big long flat one where the trout aren't going around it, they're coming up over, they'll always be on this one. The reason why is that those fish can position and they can look up and out. They're sitting on the bottom in the cover and the food has to come to them and they've got it silhouetted, right? They can see everything, but they're down there hidden. They're ambush predators. So they'll always be on those flatter points or the humps if they have a choice. Pretty simple. If they don't have a choice, still outside points, but the steeper ones. Now, on lakes that don't have trout and kokanee, It's a different ball game. The bulk of your fish are still pulling to outside structures. I didn't even think this through ahead of time. So let's talk lowland reservoir, guys. Where would I line up? Lowland reservoirs, you're gonna have a lot of main lake structures, right? A lot of rolling humps, wandering creek channels, things like that. The upper end of those lakes, if they do have a river coming into them, you've usually got some bluffs at that end. The upper end of the lake, the fish will pull to the first deep water. So if you've got bluffs on the river channel, they're gonna collect there. And that's a place I just described how to stair step that bait, right? That really steep structure, nearest where it's just shallow from there on, they'll be there. If your fish are out on the main body on a lowland, you know, maybe you've got good shoreline, but then you've got sets of humps and wandering creek channels out in the open, they'll, at the coldest, they'll pull all the way out to the last structures that aren't too deep. So all the way out to a main river arm, or all the way out, they'll follow a creek until it goes out and they come together, and they'll sit there at that point. And that might be 40 feet deep, but they'll sit at that point. They'll sit on the tops of those last humps, the ends of long tapering points. That's where you'll find those fish. Highland reservoir, guys, so steeper canyon type lakes with a dam on it. Highland reservoirs tend to have a lot of rock in them, not all. Tend to have a lot of lay downs, right? Highland reservoirs are usually canyons, so a lot of trees will drop into them. Those types of lakes, those can be tricky because sometimes you have long tapering points, sometimes you don't. If you have long tapering points near deep water, they'll be out there right where it meets the deep water. If you don't, they might line up on whatever secondaries you have going back into arms. They'll come out those secondaries until they get just to where it's going to meet the main body. But generally, the major dividing points. So a highland reservoir will have fingers, right? Where those major fingers come together and hit your main body, they'll come out to those points. If there's humps, they'll be on those humps. If you don't have a lot of that, they'll come out to the main river. If it wanders and it makes a hard outside turn, that's where you get that bluff wall. They'll get on those steep, sheer bluff walls, that same exact thing. You can catch them on those bluffs, particularly where the bluffs transition back to something else. So where the bluffs come around and that creek starts to leave and that bluff transitions back to a flat bank. They'll be there at that transition. Again, I'm just trying, I want you hopefully to hear something that matches the lake that you go fishing, because I'm telling you to go so slow that you're going to need to have a starting point. So hopefully one of those things I just described jives with what you're familiar with, and that will help you. River systems are a whole different ballgame. When water gets really, really cold in a river system, the fish try to pull to slack water. So if you've got a dead end that still has deep water, it has to have deep water, they'll go into the dead end. If it doesn't have deep water, they'll tend to go to the mouth of the dead end and sit right there where they can just barely get out of the current. That's what they prefer, but they prefer to get out of current so they're not actively working in that really, really cold water. Hopefully you had something trigger. Something will help you find the starting point on your lake. Now, speed cranking and A-rigging, obviously you can cover a lot more water, but it's still the same structures. Those biggest fish always take the best spot. And that's really hard for people to understand, because you'll show up to a trout lake and you're like, there's the boat ramp, there's the giant point, but it's getting fished by every single guy. That doesn't mean it's not still the best spot, and the best apex predator is still there. She's there. She's just educated. But that didn't change that that's where she is. And that's why that can take days and weeks and months to cross paths with that fish when she's willing to feed. She sees a lot go by. But understanding that they take the best spot. So if you look at the map of your lake, that's why so often Tim and I will go to a new lake, shoot a video. We have no clue about the lake. We look at the map, we get on the water, we run the likely locations, we catch fish, we put out the video, and then we get emails or messages or DMs from people that are like, you just blew up the best spot on that lake. That happens way more often than you think. The reason why is that in every lake, the biggest fish, the apex fish, sit on the best spots. It's not actually that hard to put together. Sometimes it's hard to catch them, but it's not hard to know where they live. Hopefully, guys, this helps you. I hope you get out there. I hope the comments are full of people that go out and catch giants, because you can do it. You can catch the biggest largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass of your life right now. You can do it all the way through winter. The coolest thing about right now is that if you find them, as long as there's not a giant weather or water fluctuation, those fish are permanent. They will stay there all the way to spring. Once that lake starts to rise, or once you get a big blowout, or it gets crazy cold or crazy hot, they might shift. But generally speaking, in winter, once we've settled into the heart of the cold, once you've found them, you've found them. And you can catch them for an extended period of time. Get out there, guys. Get out in the cold. It's incredibly peaceful to be out on that lake by yourself. Catch those great big bass. Be sure to treat them with care. Turn those fish loose. These fish don't turn giant overnight. Turn those big ones loose, because the genetics that grow big ones need to stay in that lake if you want to keep growing big ones. Not every bass ever grows to be giant. Some bass can live their entire life and stay small. Some have the genetics to become monsters. When you get one of those special fish, put them back in the lake if you can. Guys, get out there, have a blast. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.